Please be aware, in this podcast series we talk about all areas of safeguarding, which some people may find upsetting. So please make sure you're okay listening to today's topic. Be mindful of those around you, such as children, that you might not want to listen in. Hi, I'm SSS Safeguarding Director Sam Preston.
And I'm former head teacher and content author Sara Spinks.
So today we're focusing on the role of the appropriate adult. This is a key safeguarding role, so it's critical those undertaking the role understand fully what it's all about. The concept of an appropriate adult is rooted in English law, specifically the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1984. Essentially, an appropriate adult is a responsible individual, typically a parent, guardian, or professional, who ensures that the rights, welfare, and entitlements of children and vulnerable individuals in police custody are safeguarded. So, Sara, I know we've done quite a bit of work on this. Can you walk us through some of the key responsibilities of an appropriate adult?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. An appropriate adult plays a sort of multifaceted role. Firstly, they're there to support and assist the vulnerable individual through police procedures, ensuring they understand their rights and can effectively participate. And they also act as watchdogs, ensuring that the police conduct themselves properly and fairly. And they're making sure that if there are any breach of rights or mistreatment, the appropriate adult has the authority to sort of intervene and, escalate the issue, really.
So it's clear that the role of the appropriate adult is indispensable in ensuring the welfare and rights of vulnerable individuals, whether in police custody or within, education settings. What specifically is the role of the appropriate adult with regard to advice, support and assistance for a vulnerable suspect?
Well, appropriate adults have a role in helping children and vulnerable people to understand their rights, use their rights and participate effectively. And this involves checking whether a person understands the meaning and significance of information provided to them, checking whether a person understands the meaning and significance of questions asked of them and their own replies, including when they are asked to give their consent to procedures, helping a person to understand the meaning and significance of information and questions, and also providing general sort of non-legal advice about custody procedures and their rights, including on the scope and limit of the appropriate adult's role versus assessing legal advice.
Yeah. So just to reiterate there, Sara, those acting as appropriate adults, they may not give legal advice. That's not their role. That's the role of the solicitor or the police station legal representative. Yeah.
Yeah.
However, the appropriate adult can require a solicitor to attend, even if a child or adult has waived their right to legal representation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So are there specific guidelines or protocols that the appropriate adult needs to follow?
Yeah, absolutely. So the role is outlined in detail in various legal documents, such as the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, sometimes referred to as PACE, and the Crime and Disorder Act. Appropriate adults must adhere to these guidelines diligently, ensuring they don't overstep their boundaries while they're still advocating for the individual in their care.
Okay. So let's the focus to the context of schools. How does the role of the appropriate adult come into play when dealing, with pupil searches, say?
Well, pupil searches are a critical area where the presence of an appropriate adult can make a significant difference. Schools have the legal authority to search students and their belongings if there are reasonable grounds to suspect possession of prohibited items, as outlined in their behaviour policies.
So prohibited items, we'll be talking about knives, weapons, drugs, stolen goods, but it's also other items that are specified by the school rules, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And the head teacher must annually publicise this policy to staff, students and parents.
Right. Okay. So they must do that on an annual basis. Okay, I think it's important to recognise that possession of prohibited items, especially dangerous ones like knives or drugs, from a safeguarding point of view, that might indicate involvement in criminal behaviour or also exploitation.
Yeah, you're right, Sam. Outcomes of these searches may indeed identify students in need of support or referral to social services.
Mm. So whilst it's obviously deeply concerning if a child is carrying a knife, as well as taking action, we really need to question, why are they doing this? For instance, is it for, that sort of perceived self-protection?
Yeah, absolutely. Staff can search with a student's consent or without it if there are reasonable grounds to suspect possession. Searches are limited to outer clothing and cannot involve the removal of clothing next to the skin or intimate searches. Though not mandatory, it is advisable for an appropriate adult to be present during searches, providing that support and reassurances to both the students and the parents.
So when you say that, Sarah, we're saying, if that's going to be conducted in the school setting, the outer clothing, actually, it's a good idea to have an appropriate adult there as well.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So what about if a strip search is deemed necessary? I mean, that's not something school staff undertake. So say schools have exhausted the less intrusive search methods, but still assess the need to recover a suspected item. We're then talking about police involvement and the possibility of strip searches.
Absolutely. Well, firstly, schools must document this decision and why escalation to police involvement is deemed necessary. Once police involvement is deemed necessary, they take charge, including decisions regarding strip searches if deemed necessary. So school staff must advocate for the students' safety and well-being throughout the process. Parents should ideally be informed before a strip search by police and should be notified afterwards, if not before. Schools should facilitate parental involvement as the appropriate adult if desired as well.
Mm. Now, there have been headlines in the news, and it continues to be actually, just recently, headlines in the news about strip searches. And we should just say that, strip searches should be rare and justified only if necessary to remove an item related to a criminal offence with reasonable suspicion that the student has concealed such an item. Is there a specific process for strip searches?
Well, the law provides specific guidance regarding who must be present and conduct checks during strip searches. According to the Department for Education advice, strip searches involving exposure of intimate body parts require at least 2 individuals other than the student, with one being the appropriate adult, unless there's an urgent risk of harm. Police officers conducting the search must be of the same sex as the student, although an appropriate adult of a different sex may be present if requested by the student. Strip searches should only occur when necessary to remove items related to criminal offences, as we've said, with consideration given to the potential distress caused to the student and to others.
Right. So
strong. Yeah.
Yeah. So following a strip search, students should receive appropriate support regardless of whether the suspected item's found. Yeah.
Yeah.
Safeguarding procedures, they should be followed. That should involve the designated staff members. And, there really needs to be that focus on the student's well-being and any underlying issues that led to the search.
Yeah, and students should be given the opportunity to express their views on the search, and schools should consider preventative measures for students who may be at risk of frequent strip searches.
Is there any particular guidance for appropriate adults to follow during strip searches?
Well, any staff member serving as an appropriate adult for strip searches must be clear about the Department for Education's guidance, particularly paragraphs 38 to 40. While there's no restriction on who can fulfil this role, schools typically assign it to the designated safeguarding lead or the DSL or members of the safeguarding team.
Yeah, and that kind of makes sense, from the perspective of the role they're undertaking, but also from, as we were talking about earlier, they're also going to have on that radar what is going on in that child's life. Are they at risk?
Yeah.
Out of the context of the immediacy of the incident, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So we've already said the appropriate adult should ideally be of the same sex, the same gender as the student being searched, although the student can request otherwise. If the student chooses not to have an appropriate adult present, they must express this in the presence of the appropriate adult, and both parties must agree. And I think that's really important. It has, there has to be that transparency. And in such cases, the designated safeguarding lead and the head teacher should be informed.
Absolutely, that's right, Sam. If the student requests the absence of the appropriate adult should discuss the situation with the student, ensuring that they really understand their position and the role of the appropriate adult. That decision should be documented and signed by the appropriate adult. If there's a disagreement, the appropriate adult should remain present for the search. So I think that's really clear.
Yeah. So let's move on. What about the case of intimate searches? And just to be clear, this is different to a strip search. It's a search which requires an examination of a person's body orifices other than the mouth. And before conducted, they must be authorised by a police inspector.
Absolutely. There are two scenarios in which an intimate search may be conducted. So, to search for something that poses potential harm to the individual or others, or to search for a Class A drug. Before conducting an intimate search, the individual must be informed of the following. So they must be informed of the authorisation for the search has been granted by a police inspector, and the grounds for the authorisation and why the item cannot be retrieved without an intimate search. So if the individual refuses their consent to the search for a Class A drug, excluding the search for harmful articles, this refusal must be documented. Additionally, they must be reminded that their refusal could potentially impact their case if it proceeds to trial, there's criminal convictions.
Right, okay. So who can carry out an intimate search then?
Well, an intimate search can only be conducted by a registered medical practitioner or a registered nurse, unless deemed impractical by a police inspector, particularly if the search is for something that could cause harm to the individual or others. In such cases, a police officer may be authorised to perform the search as a last resort, ensuring they are of the same sex as the detainee.
Yeah, and I will just say that, that they will always strive for that to be carried out by a medical practitioner. It is unusual. So just for clarity, in all instances, reasonable force can't be used. We've got to have a minimum of 2 persons present, excluding the detainee. Let's call them the detainee for these purposes. Vulnerable individuals and juveniles must only be searched in the presence of an appropriate adult of the same sex unless they request one of the opposite sex. Before authorising an intimate search, a police inspector must exhaust all reasonable efforts to have the detainee voluntarily hand over the item. So let's just think about recording these searches. What are the guidelines?
Well, as with all safeguarding incidents, recording events, including strip searches, is a crucial procedure. According to the Department for Education guidance, schools should maintain detailed records of all searches and analyse them regularly, to spot any patterns or trends. It's considered best practice to document all searches, including those conducted by police on school premises. Regular analysis of these records, can really help identify trends or trigger points as well, allowing schools to really address issues and implementing sort of preventative measures, really, or provide data to external, sources such as data indicating disparities related to age, gender, sex, race, all those different sort of trigger data points, really.
Yeah, and that's been, it has been something, there have been issues raised recently with regard to race and gender and the frequency of different types of searches. So it's hugely important that this documentation is done, because that's where, we can pick up possible areas of practice that we do need to seriously review. I think just to sort of almost like summarise, we all know it's crucial that we understand the importance of safeguarding and the roles that we play in protecting those who need it most. But the role of appropriate adult is key. However, no one should undertake it without fully understanding the parameters of the role. I think that's really important to say. You can find more information on the role of the appropriate adult. Just head to our website and you'll find more information there, which will just really inform anybody who's perhaps thinking about actually undertaking that role. So I guess my final message would be, really check out what the role entails, and that way you'll find out whether, you think it is a role that you want to undertake or that you would feel comfortable undertaking.